Boker Tov. Today's daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Kuf Yud Aleph 111. We're going to start on Kuf Yud Amud Beis, 7 lines from the bottom. Today's daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael in this difficult time, for Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and for Shmira for the Chayalim. So it said in our Mishnah that we've been discussing the idea that if a person steals money from a convert and he lies about it under oath, so the ger, and he lies about it under oath, and then the convert dies, so now he has to pay back, generally speaking, the laws, you pay back the money plus 1/5, plus bring a carbon asham. So it says that, and you give the money to the Kohen because the convert has no relatives. So let's say we're talking about a situation where he goes to give the money, and after he gives the money, the Kohen, after he gives the money, the ger dies. So there's nobody to give it to. So it says that the money is given. It says in our mission, the money is given, he can't get the money back. It says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Shema Mina, we learn from here, Kasef Mechaper Mechza, a very powerful idea. Money achieves half an atonement. But sometimes we get lost in the language and the arguments of the Gemara. We forget to just pull out the beautiful language. Money can serve half an atonement. We sometimes think you have to get a full atonement in life. No, you give tzedakah even if you can't fix everything. Kesef mechaper melza. The ilu mechaper, because if it wouldn't serve as an atonement at all, then havamina mahader wa yorshin. I would have said that this money that he gave has to go back to the heirs. My time, what's the reasoning? Because he didn't separate it. He separated it in order to achieve atonement. And if he wasn't achieving atonement, it should go back. It would be what's called a mekachtos, a mistaken transaction. Ella, so we see from here that the money does serve a purpose, and it serves as half an atonement. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if that's the case, let's say you have a sin offering whose owner died, and the halacha is that such an animal is put into a room and the door is closed, so the animal dies. Well, teipa kuchun, but if the owner dies, the animal should become not sacred anymore. It should become chulin. Because you separate the animal to be a chatas, not for it to be an unqualified sacrifice. Gemara says, no, that case is different. Because chatas shemesu ba'aweh, a chatas, sin offering, whose owner has died, it's halacha Moshe Mitzinai, that it's going to die, and so therefore that's why we do it. Well, if that's the case, Gemara says, what about an asham? Asham shemesu ba'aweh. Let's say a carbon asham whose owner has died. That too should go away. Do the same argument. That should become a chulin unconsecrated. Because it wasn't separated for the purpose of becoming an unusable carbon. Gemara says, asham nami hilchas gemira. I know we have a halacha Moshe Mitzinai about an asham also. Kol shebachatas meisa ba'asham roa. Anything that if it would be a sin offering, it would die. By an asham, it grazes. Gemara says another case, Amayata Yavama, a woman whose husband died, Shenafov named Mukashrin, she falls to Yibam or Chalitza before her brother-in-law, then he is somebody who's filled with boils. He's repulsive. Tepuk below Chalitza. She shouldn't even require Chalitza. She should be Muteris L'Shuk. She should be allowed to marry whoever she wants. Without Chalitza, Dadati Da'achil Kacha Atzma. She didn't betroth herself with the intent of falling to her brother-in-law, who's a mukashchin, who's repulsive. Mara says, no, Hasam, there in that case, Anan Sahadi, we say actually she would have done that on top of 111a. The Meinach Nichalaba called who. We know she would have actually liked to get married to any man, meaning to say she would have married the first man, even if there's the possibility that if he'll die, she'll go to his brother who's a mukashlim. Like Reish Lakish taught, Amar Reish Lakish, Tavo Meitav, Tandu Milametav Armulu. it's better for people to live with another person, two people together, than to live by herself. Meaning to say, a woman prefers to live with somebody else than living by herself. So she would have even married this man, knowing his brother is a mukashchin, knowing that there's a possibility that if he dies, she'll have to get chalitza from his brother-in-law. So now we had said that that if you have to give, it says in the Mishnah, you have to give the money, the Kohen, you have to give the money to the Kohen before you bring the carbon. Bring the carbon before the money, it's no good. Now the watch is that there were 24 watches that served in the temple. The first watch was called Yehoyarav, and the second was the Yedaya family. So it said in our Mishnah that if you gave the money to Yehoyarav and then the carbon to Yedaya, you fulfill your obligation. But if you gave the asham to Yehoyarav, the carbon to Yehoyarav, and then the money to Yedaya, then if the asham is still in existence, the Bnei Yedaya should bring it. But otherwise, you have to go and bring another asham. Now we learn in the Brisa, Tanarabana Nasam Asham Yehoyarav. What's he brought the carbon to Yehoyarav, the kesef Yedaya, and the money he brought to Yedaya. And under those circumstances, Yachzir kesef Eitel Asham. Under those circumstances, so you have the carbon is with Yehoyarav, and the money is with Yedaya. So what do? So you take the money and you bring it to the Asham, you bring it to Yehoyarav. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim say no. Take the carbon from Yehoyarav and bring it to the money, which is Yedaya. Gemara says, well, what's the scenario which this price is referring to? What's the scenario? If you're saying you gave the carbon to Yehoyarav at the proper time in their watch, and the money to Yedaya at the proper time in their watch, well, okay, I understand to the Rabbanon that we're penalizing Yehoyarav that he because he received his asham before the money, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is he penalizing Yedaya? Yedaya got it properly after the carbon that he got the money, so he's allowed to get his money. Why are we penalizing him? According to Rabbi Yehuda, he has to bring the money to Yehoyarav. So Amarava Achmai Eskina, no. So the scenario is the Yav Asham Yehoyarav, the Mishmarto to Yehoyarav, the Kesef Yedaya, the Mishmarto to Yehoyarav. Now we're talking about a case where the carbon was given to Yehoyarav during the time of Yehoyarav. Okay, but he gave it too early, but still, the money was given to Yedaya, but it was Yehoyarav's watch. So Yedaya had no business getting that money. So Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Kivan Delav Mishmaros to Yedaya, since it wasn't Yedaya's watch, well, Yedaya consinole. We penalize Yedaya. Let's take the money and bring it to Yehoyarav. Rabbanan Savri, no. Shalokadin, who avid Bnei Yehoyarav. Bnei Yehoyarav also did something wrong. They shouldn't have taken the carbon first. The kibu Asha Mikmekesef, they got the carbon before the money. Therefore, we penalize Yehoyarav, the Yachzar Asha Metzal Kesef. We take their money and we bring it to Yedaya. Mar says, Tanya, I'm a Rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi says, according to the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that we take the money of Yedaya and we make it go to Yehoyarav, in Kadmu b'nei Yehoyarav, v'krivu es Asham. But let's say the people of Yehoyarav went ahead and they brought their Asham, Yachzor v'yavi Asham acher, v'yakrivu b'nei Yedaya. So Rabbi Yehuda says, let's say Yehoyarav got their carbon, and then Yedaya got the money, and then Yehoyarav brought their asham. So then the person who gave the asham has to go, the robber has to go and give another asham to Bnei Yedaya, and the people of Yehoyarav, they get to keep the asham that they brought. So Gemara says, well, what's this asham good for? Asham pasalhu, it's disqualified. You can't eat the meat. This asham was disqualified. What's your plan to do with it? So the Gemara explains, yes, you could. It does have a purpose. I'm a rava oro. You can use its skin. Tanya, I'm a Rebbe, a different Rebbe Yehuda. According to Rebbe Yehuda, who says you take the money from Yedaya and bring it to the Yehoyarav watch. Im Kiyim Asham, if the Asham is still in existence, Yachzer Asham Eitzel Kesef. Then you bring the Asham from Yehoyarav and you bring it to Yedaya. Gemara says, but that's not what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda said you bring the money from Yedaya to Yehoyarav. Rabbi Yehuda Yachzer Kesef Eitzel Asham. It's like, didn't Rabbi Yehuda say the opposite? So Gemara says, no, Hachamay Eskinon, you go into Nafik Mishmarto to Yehoyarav, V'lo Tavo. So he says, no, what we're talking about here is Hachamay Eskinon, here what we're referring to. So what does this brisa say when it means that you bring the carbon from Yehoyarav and you bring it to Yedaya? It's talking about a case where Yehoyarav finished his watch, V'lo Tavu, and they didn't make a claim for their money. And so therefore, Kamashmo and Dachui Achilu Gabayu is teaching us that Yehoyarav waived their rights to the money. And so therefore, since they waived the rights to their money, that we're saying that under these circumstances, they waived their rights, and Bnei Yedaya has the money, and so they have to bring the carbon to Bnei Yedaya. Tanya Yidoch, another price that says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Im Kim Asham, Yachzor Kesef Eitzel Asham. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, if the Asham is still in existence, Bnei Yedaya has to bring the money to the Asham, to Yehoyarav. Gemara says, Pshita Achi Yisli. Well, that's exactly what he said. What's Rabbi being Machadish here? No, the Gemara says, no, Achamay Eskinan could go into Nafik Mishpartam Dahani Udahani V'lo Tavu. No, both Yehoyarav and Yedaya's watch ended, and neither one made a claim on the other. So Mao the Tema, you might have said, Achule Gabe Adadi. You might have said that they each waived the rights to the other's offering. Kamash Malon, we say the Amrina Kivin Tavi Haju Beresha. We say that since Bnei Yedaya also didn't make the claim for the Asham in their watch, therefore the money goes back to the Asham. And the Bnei Yehoyarav have to bring it when their watch comes back. So after 24 weeks, when their watch comes back. So that's what Rebbe's saying. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Asham is still in existence, and Yedaya doesn't make the claim. We still bring the money all the way back to Yehoyarav. And now the Gemara says that because if a person brings their carbon before their money, it's no good. You have to bring the money and only then bring the carbon. So what's the source for this idea? Amarava the Amar. It's based on the fact that the pasuk says, "Ha'asham mushav ha'Hashem ha'kohen mavad el kippurim asher yachaper bo." So from the fact that it says aside from the el kippurim, this teaches us mikol the kasef bereisha, that money has to be brought first. So Amar humei rabban l'Rava, if that's the case, almeyatim mavad olas haboker. Aside from the Oas HaBoker, Hachinami, it says about the Karban Musaf on Shabbos that it's the brought aside from the Oas HaBoker. Therefore, you also say, Mikal to Musaf and Bereisha. Would you say that the Karban Musaf is brought first? But we learn in the Bryce from the fact that it says Milvad, Vatanya, Minayan Shli Davar Kodem with Tamid Shel Shachar. How do we know that nothing can be brought before the Tamid Shel Shachar? Tamalomar Varacho Ha'olah, that nothing can be brought. V'amarava Ha'olah Olah Rishona. The carbon Tamid comes first. So Amarle, so what's your source for the idea that the money has to be brought before the carbon? So under these circumstances, Rava says, no, Ana me'asher yachaper bo nafko. V'adayin will keep her. I learned out from the fact that it says asher yachaper bo. And he hasn't yet achieved atonement, so therefore the money carbon can't work as an atonement until he pays the money. It says that if he gave the principal, but not the fifth, then he could still bring the carbon. The fifth is not the essential part. It says the Gemara, how do we know? Now this is talking about another case where there's a fifth. That's if a person misappropriates temple property accidentally. That's called me'ilah. He pays back the principal plus 1/5, and he brings the carbon asham. How do we know that if he brought back his money, but he didn't bring the asham, voy vi ashamo, or ashama voy vi mila, so we brought his asham, but without the mi'ila, shelo yatze, he has not fulfilled his obligations. Says the verse, Tamomer be'el ha'asham v'nislach lo. So we see from here that he has to bring the el ha'asham v'nislach lo, which implies there's no atonement unless there's both the ayol and the karen. The asham is the karen, as we're going to see in a moment that we learn out from Gezel Ger. So the Gemara says, "Uminayin shem hevi ashamo achol hevi milaso shelo yatza." How do we know that if he brought his carbon without bringing his money back, he's not fulfilled his obligation? Tam Omer be'el hasham bichvar, that he has already paid back his money, as it says be'el hasham, meaning to say when the karen was already paid. I might think that just like the ayol and the asham are essential for the me'ilah, so too the extra fifth is essential, and you can't have atonement without it. That the ram and the asham are essential for the hektish, but the chomesh is not essential. The yomad hektish mehedjo mehektish, and the Gemara tells us we learn out that me'ilah from Gezel Ger and vice versa. Hektish mehedjo, we learn out the me'ilah from the Gezel Ger. Ma asham da asam karen, just like the word by Gezel Ger, the word asham refers to the paying back the principal. Afasham da acha karen. Also by me'ilah, the word asham refers to paying back the money that was taken. Vehedjo mehektish, and we learn out Gezel Ger from me'ilah mehektish in chomesh makif, just like by me'ilah that extra fifth is not essential for atonement. Afhedjo nami in chomesh makif. Also by the Gezel Ger, the extra fifth is not essential for the atonement. Hadron alacha goes aleitzim. Hadron alacha goes aleitzim. And now we go to the last chapter of Bava Kamma, which is called Hagozel Machio, but it's also called Hagozel Basra. The last Hagozel, because the last two chapters begin with the word Hagozel. So it says in the Mishnah on the top of 111b, Hagozel Machio Espanav, one who steals and feeds his children, and then he puts the food in front of them. And Rashi tells us it means he steals and feeds his children, or he left behind for them the food. Petura milashayim, then the children don't have to pay. And the Gemara is going to explain why. Two reasons. But if it's something that has achrayos, usually that means real estate. We'll see what it means here. Then they do have to pay it. So Amar Rav Chisda, what are we talking about here? It says Rav Chisda, let's say somebody steals it and the owner has not given up hope yet. And then somebody else comes and consumes it. Then the person from whom he was stolen, the nigzal, is able to collect it from either one. My time, because it's still in this person's domain. And so therefore, the person who eats it, it's like he stole it from him. And so therefore, he could collect it from either one. Gemara says, but how can Rav Chisda say that? Tanana goes on says explicitly in our Mishnah that if he gives it to his children, they don't have to pay. To you have to do Rav Chisda. Isn't this a refutation of Rav Chisda? So Rav Chisda would say, Amar Rav Chisda, Kitanyahi, or Kitaniyahi, when our Mishnah taught this, it's La'achar Yosh. He's already given up hope. So once he's given up hope, then they don't have to pay because only the first guy was the thief, not the second guy. So that's what our Mishnah said. So Amar Rami Bar Chama, Zoso Maris, teaches us that if he leaves it before them, they are exempt from having to pay. Rishus Yorish, Rishus Lokeach. We see from here that the domain of the heirs are like the domain of the purchaser. Meaning to say it's like a new domain that the father bequeaths it to his children. It's like he sold it to somebody else. And so since we're saying it's after Yeush, then we're going to say the orphans have acquired it from the fact that he gave up hope and it changed Rishus. Because if it was just Yeush by itself, that would not have been enough to acquire it according to this approach, because it doesn't say that. I mean, so that would not have been enough to acquire it. So the Gemara says, going back to this case, that was Rabbi Bava Kamma, that this teaches us the Rishus Yorishus, Rishus L'Koyach Tami. So it means to say once it goes, it's a totally different domain. Rava says, no, actually, Rishus Yorish Lab, Rishus L'Koyach Tami. No, the error is it's not like a new Rishus. So if that's the case, so why don't the children have to pay it back? That after their father died, they consumed it. And so, since they're not the ones who stole it, the nigzal, the one who was robbed, cannot make the claim from them. Gemara says, that if it's something that has achrayus, like something that's Rashi says here, what it means, like something that's recognizable, and you see it like real estate or like a very specific jacket or a piece of clothing, then we're going to say they have to pay it back. Then they have to take it back because of the honor for their father. We call the ratio big zela kayemas askin. So that talks about that in the first case. It's talking about that the zela is still intact, and nevertheless, where it's not because of the honor of their father, they don't have to return it. So this is a question on Rava. So the Gemara explains, Rava would say, no, Rava said this is what it means. If their father had indeed left for them something that's recognizable, they have to pay. The Gemara says, but Gemara says, but how could this be? But how could this be? Didn't Rebbe teach his son Rebbe Shimon that our Mishnah was talking about a case? Lo davar sheish b'achrayis mamish. A Mishnah doesn't mean something that's actual real estate. That even if it was a cow or a donkey that he was using, they have to return for their honor for their father. And so, therefore, we see. So, and everybody testifies that this was the father. So we see from here that we're talking about a case where the gzela was kayemes, and we say that under those circumstances they still don't have to pay it back, even though the theft was intact. Rava, so Rava says, Ki shachivna Rabbi Oshaya nafak levayasi. When I die, Rabbi Oshaya is going to come out to greet me from the Shemayim. The taritz the masnisin kavase, because I explain the Mishnah according to his opinion. Tani Rabbi Oshaya taught Agozel Machos Banaf Petur Milashayim. Rabbi Oshaya taught that if somebody steals and feeds his children, they don't have to pay. But Niach of name Gzel Chayaves Chayavin. If you left in front of them the gzela that's intact, they're obligated. Ain't a gzela kayemes, but if it's not intact, peturin, they're going to be exempt. But if the father left in front of them achrayas nechasim, then they would have to pay. So we see that this law about achrayas nechasim, that where it's intact, that's talking about a circumstance that it's not, that the gazelle is not intact. But if the gazelle is intact, they always have to return it because there's no change of rishus. So this is how we'll read it again. How does Rava read our Mishnah according to Rabbi Oshaya? Rabbi Oshaya said, "Agozo machos banav," then they're exempt. But if you left in front of them gazelle kayemes, then they have to return it. But if it's not intact, then they are exempt. If you left achrayas nechazim, they have to pay. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? Ein gazelle kayemes beturin. If the gazelle is not intact, they're exempt from having to pay. You have to do Rav Chisda. Isn't this a refutation of Rav Chisda? Because Rav Chisda says they always have to pay. No, that case is referring to after he gave a pope. Didn't we say that if it's intact, he has to pay? You have to do Rabbi Kamma, because Rabbi Kamma says they don't have to pay. When it says that they have to pay, that's lifnei yesh, but it's before it gives up hope. So, okay, that's today's daf. We'll stop here. The recording. Shkoyach.